Hey everyone, in this Houston Math Prep video we're going to talk about finding slope between 2 points. The first couple we're just going to do by looking at points on a grid, but then we're actually going to give you a couple of points and actually use a little bit of a formula to figure out slope. So one thing that we want to remember about slope, slope is going to basically be the rise over the run. In our other videos, we are always considering counting from left to right. So if I look over here and I have these points, I'm going to consider counting from this point on the left to this point up and to the right of it. So I'm going to start here and I'm just simply going to count. So from here, if I go up 1, 2, 3, then that puts me even with my point. And then if I go over 1, 2, then that means I go over 2. So this is my rise here. I am rising 3 units, and this is my run, both in the positive direction, positive 3, positive 2. So my slope here between these 2 points is 3/2. If I look at the picture there. Looking at another one of these, so here you can see actually if we go from the left point to the right point, we're actually going down. So if you'll notice here, if I go down 1, 2, 3, if I go down 3, then I'm even with the point, and then from here if I go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units, so if I go over 5, then I get to the point. So that is a rise of actually -3 because we're going down 3, and then +5. So my slope, which is rise over run, is going to be -3 over 5. What you'll usually see is the negative written outside of the fraction though, so we'll call it -3/5. Okay, another way you can be asked these is just to be given 2 points. So we'll remember that slope is rise over run. And here's the idea, that is y change over x change. Okay, so this is y change over x change. And there's a formula for that if we're going from the first to the second point. So what we'll have, our formula for slope, we're going to have y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And what that means, the subscript 2's are simply your x and y coordinates for the second point you're given. The subscript 1's are basically telling you use the first point that you're given. So if I go over here, this is my first point that I'm given. So this is the x coordinate of my first point, and this is the y coordinate of my first point, also known as x1 and y1. Here, this is the second point that I'm given. So the 8 is the x2, in other words, the x component of the second point, and -2 is y2, the y component of the second point. So if I know all of these and I can plug in to my formula, then that will give us y2 minus y1 will be -2 minus 1 over, and then x2 minus x1 on the bottom. So that will be x2 is 8 minus x1 is 4. And then if we go ahead and do the math there, -2 minus 1 will give us -3. And we'll get 8 minus 4 on the bottom is 4. And so we get a slope between these points of -3/4. Let's look at another. Here we have finding the slope between -7, -1, and 3, 11. So if it helps you to go through and say, well, this is my first point, so this is x1 and y1, first point. And if you want to label your second point, you can say x2, y2. I'll write down the formula one more time. So remember, slope is going to be the y change on the top. So you want to put your y2 minus y1. On the bottom, you want to put x2 minus x1. It needs to be in the correct order because the subtraction is going to make a difference. You might get an opposite sign if I were to put y2 minus y1 on top, but I put x1 minus x2 on the bottom. We want to be careful with that. So in this one here, if I do y2 minus y1 on the top, that's 11 minus -1, so be careful with your sign there. And then x2 minus x1, again, be careful with the sign, 3 minus -7. And remember, minus a negative is like plus. So this is, I'll rewrite it. You don't have to rewrite this, but I'll do it so we can see it better. So this is like 11 plus 1, and this is like 3 plus 7. So our slope is going to be 12 over 10. And we can reduce that, so we're going to write it in lowest terms, divide both by 2. We're going to say our slope is 6 over 5. So a slope of positive 6/5 on that one. All right, one here, so we're going through 4, 2 and negative 9, 2. So if I use my y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, then we can see, I'll go ahead and label x1, y1. You might not need to do this by this example, but we'll do it anyway here. If I do y2 minus y1, I get 2 minus 2 on the top. And on the bottom, x2 minus x1, I get negative 9 minus 4. So 2 minus 2 is going to give us 0 here, and then negative 9 minus 4 gives us negative 13. 0 divided by negative 13, remember 0 divided by any number, except for 0, is 0, right? So this is actually a slope of 0. And a slope of 0, if you draw these points and you actually draw a line through them, you will see that a slope of 0 means that this is a horizontal line. Okay, and then one more that's similar but a bit different in how the answer comes out. If I look at negative 3, 1 and negative 3, 6 as my points, and I use my slope formula of y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, then if I go and plug these in, my x1, y1 and my x2, y2, something a little bit different happens here, right? So my y2 minus y1, I get 6 minus 1 when I put those in from down here. And then whenever we do x2 minus x1, we get negative 3 minus negative 3. And that minus negative, think about what's happening here. So 6 minus 1 on the top will give you 5, but this is like negative 3 plus 3. So what we really end up with at the bottom is 0. We get 5 over 0. And remember, fractions are like division, so that's like the same as saying 5 divided by 0. And if you ask your calculator, or you ask anybody else who knows anything about divide by 0, we know that divide by 0 is not a thing that we can do in math. So when we have this situation and we figure out slope like this, we say that the slope is undefined. There is no way to divide by 0 and get a real number. So we are going to say that the slope is undefined. And when you have an undefined slope, then that is actually the case of a vertical line. And you'll see that if you graph these 2 points, you will notice that they are above and below each other. So that's why we get a vertical line which has undefined slope.